So have any of you ever heard of the Harvard implicit bias tests? Anybody ever hear of them? All right, a couple people have. It's something we could talk about deeper in the future, but just a little bit about it. Harvard University had created 14 tests online that are available to any of us. And the link to those tests is in the sermon that is in the order of service I sent everyone and in the chat. And there are 14 different topics that you could take a test on to help determine what your personal implicit bias test is. And an implicit bias is a bias that you're not conscious of. That's more of an unconscious bias. And many of us believe that we don't have any biases, that we are just completely clean of bias. So some of the topics are race, gender, disability, religion, weight, sexuality, skin tone, and it goes on. And actually one of the topics, and your results come up that you might lean in one direction, like more comfortable with Black people or more comfortable with white people or more comfortable with gay people or more comfortable with straight people. So here's one of the topics that's a little unusual is, are you more comfortable with Joe Biden or previous presidents? Often the results show that we are more comfortable with people like us rather than people who are not like us. Why is this? Our minds are primed to see the world in terms of us and them. We can't really help it. The moment we look upon another person's face, our minds discern in an instant whether or not they are part of us, part of our family, part of our culture, part of our religion, or possibly our political party or our community. This happens before conscious thought even begins. Our bodies actually release hormones that support us in trusting those who are like us and fearing those that are not like us. It is easier to feel empathy for those that are like us. And when one of us does something bad or that we might deem bad, we tend to attribute it to a circumstance. But if one of them does the same thing, we attribute it to that's just how they are. This is how the primal mind works. It's essential for our survival when we were in clans, when early man was evolving. And when somebody was deemed different to us, yes, they were truly a danger. But now that fear response does not support us anymore, and it actually could destroy us rather than help us or protect us. And those in power have harnessed this fear, and they use this fear to control. Father Richard Rohr shares this following statement. He says, human beings have found the most effective way to legitimize their instinct towards fear. They imagine that they are fearing or hating on behalf of something holy or noble, whether it's God, religion, truth, morality, their children, or love of country. It takes away all guilt. And one could even think of oneself as representing a moral high ground or being responsible and prudent as a result. It rarely occurs to most people that they may be becoming what they fear or hate. On the other hand, we live in a time now where science and spirituality are beginning to validate each other. And ancient spiritual truth has now become increasingly verified by science. This truth is that we are all invisibly part of one another. We share a common ancestry. The atoms in the air we breathe have passed through the lungs of our ancestors long gone. And we could look down upon the face of anyone or anything and say it is a biological fact that you are part of me. You are part of me that I don't know yet. The call to connect beyond our flesh and blood is also ancient. It has echoed down to us on the lips of indigenous leaders, spiritual leaders, and social reformers. And this has happened through the centuries. Buddha taught us to practice unending compassion. Abraham to open our tents to everyone. Jesus to love our neighbors. Muhammad to take in the orphans, and Mirabai to love without limits. They all expanded their circle of who counts as one of us, and therefore who is worthy of our care and concern. And these masters have said, we all are, everyone is. These teachings are rooted in the linguistic, cultural, and spiritual contexts of their time, but they spoke of a common vision of interconnectedness and interdependence. And it is that I am that. And in the African philosophy of Ubuntu, it is said that I am because of you. There's a common denominator in this congregation and in many UU congregations. And if you look around the screen and at each other, we might know what that or recognize that common denominator. And that is that UU folks love books. I see there's libraries behind many of us. Well, I do too. And recently I was gifted an outstanding one entitled See No Stranger. And it was gifted to me by Reverend Heidi Tesmer, who's is with us today. And the name of the book I mentioned is See No Stranger. And it is a memoir by Sikh activist Valarie Kaur. And it's also a manifesto of revolutionary love. So I'd like to share some stories that Valarie includes in her book and some teachings. So Valarie Kaur, she grew up in California, where her Sikh family had lived and farmed for a century. And her first encounter with hate was in the schoolyard, as are many in people's lives, right? And in the schoolyard, she was told she would go to hell because she wasn't Christian. And she was also told she was a black dog because her skin was brown. With that, she ran home to her beloved and wonderful grandfather, who dried her tears and shared the teachings of the Sikh founder, Guru Nanak. He said, I see no stranger. I see no enemy. Valarie's grandfather taught her to perceive the faces she met, regardless of who they are, with curiosity and wonder, and to be open to listen to their stories of who they were. And if she listened to the stories, somehow this would help her refuse to hate others, even if they hated her. And in the Sikh tradition, with that, they would vow to protect others. And she shares that this is what is meant by being a Sikh. This is the call to be a warrior saint, she describes this as. So Valarie grew and attended Stanford University. And while she was in Stanford University, 9/11 occurred, and she watched in terror and horror, as we all did. But as she watched, a flash on the screen was a brown-skinned man with a turban and a beard. And she then realized that our nation's new enemy looked just like her beloved grandfather. The turban, that's supposed to represent their commitment to serve others in the Sikh tradition, made them targets of hate, along with their Muslim brothers and sisters. The first person killed in a post 9/11 hate attack was a Sikh man that was actually a family friend of hers. And he was standing in front of his gas station in Arizona, a place where he tended to everyone and welcomed everyone, no matter where and what culture they were. And he was murdered by a man who called himself a patriot. Does that sound familiar to us? To any of us? This Sikh man was the first of many to have been killed, but his story and their stories barely made the news back then. We heard about it a little, but really not anywhere to the level of what was happening in the United States. So Valarie did not know what to do, but she knew she had a camera. And she actually had a video camera, and she set out with a Sikh colleague and fellow student to wander around the United States and to record and interview and follow up on these acts, these atrocities, these hate crimes. And so the first place she went to visit was the widow of this Sikh gentleman who was the first to be killed. And when she sat with her, his widow, she wept with her. And she asked her, "What would you like to tell the people of America?" And she expected this widow to blame. And instead, the widow looked at Valarie and said, "Tell them thank you. Because 3,000 of my fellow Americans came to my husband's memorial. They didn't know me and they wept with me. Tell them thank you." So Valarie went on to create that documentary and to become an American civil rights activist and a lawyer. She has labored with communities of color since 9/11. And she's fought unjust policies by the state and acts of hate on the street. She shares that her life on the front lines of fighting hate in America has been a study in revolutionary love. She shares that revolutionary love is the choice to enter into labor for others who do not look like us. And she feels that the rage of this era, and that the rage of this era is that there is a call to revolutionary love in these times. Valarie shares also that if you cringe when people say love is the answer, she does as well. A lot of people, when they hear that, it sounds non-engaging and not with power and very passive. But Valarie does see love as fierce and one of the most powerful options that are known to reform. So she shares that love must be practiced. This is her teachings. Love must be practiced in 3 directions to be revolutionary. And she says that loving just ourselves feels good, but it's narcissism. Loving only our opponents is actually self-loathing. And loving others, only others, outside of ourselves, is ineffective. And here's her lessons. The first lesson in revolutionary love is to love others. And in order to love others, we are invited to see no strangers. And she suggests that we could train our eyes to look upon strangers in the street and on the subway or on the screen, wherever we see someone that is different than us, and imagine them to be our brother or our sister or our friend. And when we say this, we are saying you are a part of me that I just don't know. Her second lesson in revolutionary love is to love our opponents. And she says to tend to the wound in them. This could be a stretch for a lot of us, but she says tending to the wound in them is not healing them, only they could do that. But she shares to see our opponents, the terrorist, the fanatic, the demagogue, as people who have been radicalized by cultures and policies that together we can change. And if we just fought bad actors, she shares, we don't change very much. But when we battle bad systems, we see change. And in these battlings of systems, this Valarie has actively worked on campaigns that have released hundreds of people out of solitary confinement. She's reformed a corrupt police department, changed federal hate crime policies, and many other things in between her many stints in and out of prison. The choice to love our opponents is moral and pragmatic, she shares, and that it opens up previously unimaginable possibilities of reconciliation. And if our goal is not reconciliation, then we're not fighting for a beloved community, are we? And the third lesson in revolutionary love is to love ourselves. Gandhi, King, Mandela, they taught us a lot about how to love others and how to love opponents, but they didn't really mention loving ourselves. And it's essential. It's essential to care for ourselves and to mind for ourselves and to find our way to joy. Because loving opponents requires us to love ourselves. Loving ourselves creates joy, and joy is an act of moral resistance. Because in joy, we can see even darkness with new eyes. What if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if it's just before a new birth, this darkness? She shares that joy is the gift of love. Grief is the price of love. And that anger is the force that protects love. So as we step into thinking about our activism, let's do it with the Sikh tradition in a few questions. So I'm going to ask all of you to consider these as I ask these to you. First, what is your sword? The Sikhs all carry a sword, a small sword on their body. It's part of their sacred practice, part of their 5Ks. What can you fight on behalf? What can you use as your tool? Could you use your pen? Could you use your voice? Can you use your money? Can you use your presence? And what might be your shield? What will you use to protect yourself and others? Your camera, your legal counsel, your group of allies, or a public witness? And what is your method to remain centered? Sikhs carry into battle a durub, I think it's pronounced dilruba, and it's a small musical instrument that they use to help center themselves. So the question is, how do you continue to keep yourself centered as we do this work? What centers you? Singing, dancing, walking, yoga, prayer, meditation. And finally, who is your sacred community? You only need 3 kinds of people. You need people who see the best in you. people who are willing to fight on your side, and people who are willing to fight for you when you need their help. You bring these all together, and you have created a pocket of revolutionary love. So in closing, I'll leave you with these questions. What does it mean for you to be a warrior sage? Who will you fight for? What breaks your heart? What will you risk? Choose your sword and shield. You don't need to know the answers. You just have to be ready for when the moment says now. May we be ready. May it be so. If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.